Hello, my name is Matthew Roy, and welcome to Grieving Teens University, or GTU, a new tool to help parents understand their children's grief and help children express themselves in healthy and safe ways. Dr. Tom Morris is the founder of Grieving Teens and has been working with youth for over 44 years. He has worked all around the world in places such as Chicago, LA, Korea, and in the Desert Valley. So who the heck am I? Like I said, my name is Matthew Roy, and I'm an example of what these grief groups can do for young people. I was introduced to Tom my senior year at Palm Desert High School in 2012. My basketball coach, Don Brady, saw it necessary for me to talk to someone like Tom because I held a lot of anger and resentment within me over stuff that happened when I was a kid. Don't worry, I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit later. Without Grieving Teens and without Tom, I wouldn't be here. After I met Tom and graduated from high school, I got my AA from COD in communications. Then I got a full scholarship to play football at Fort Lewis College in Durango, Colorado. I graduated in 2018 with my bachelor's in journalism and multimedia studies, and I am now getting my master's at ASU in sports journalism and supposed to graduate in December. Go me. This program, it gave me new life, and it all started back at PDHS 23 years ago. In 1997, Tom was asked by a teacher and good friend to come in and speak to a PDHS health class about dying, death, and grief. The teacher's parents had just passed away and said he couldn't speak on the matter, despite the subject being such a big part of the curriculum. Morris said he would do it. Tom took this task seriously, and he even ordered a casket to put in front of the class to set the stage and use as a prop for the teens. What Tom discovered during his 45-minute conversation with the students set the stage for the next venture in his own life. He realized that for most of the students, this was their first discussion about death. They never talked about it at home or at all, and as the class went on, their unresolved issues about mortality and grief came to the surface. Grieving Teens is a result of that very day. Morris began extensive reading on grief and went back to school in 1998. He began facilitating grief groups in the spring of 97-98 at PDHS. The basic presentation used then is still used today. 1. Facing death. 2. Coping with death. And 3. Living life in the view of death. Grieving Teens coaches students through their grief. Grief is all-encompassing and stems from not just the passing of loved ones, but also divorce, abuse, abandonment, and so much more. Teenagers deal with events in their own unique ways, and Grieving Teens is here to help them deal with it. Life requires death as its conclusion, and understanding that fact of life is important. Growing is important. And not being torn down by death, but growing from it, is a choice that each individual must make. Life always includes its shares of losses and goodbyes. Coping and growing in and through change and loss is part of the process of life here on Earth. Our first session in GTU is explaining what grief is. Understanding it is important because if you don't expect it, it will creep up on you. What is grief? It's the reaction of the whole person to any difficult circumstance. Everything is affected by grief. This includes physical, social, mental, emotional, and spiritual makeups of us as human beings. We cannot expect any two people to respond the same way, even in a similar situation. William Worden, who developed the 4 tasks of grief, wrote, "Physically, death has an effect on people. It is common for grieving people to feel sick, weak, or have a feeling of hollowness in their gut. Some experience dryness of the mouth and tightness in the throat and chest. There is crying, loss, an increase of appetite, weakness, and lack of energy. Sleep patterns may also be altered, while others may experience nightmares. The physical effects can last days, weeks, months, and even years, and the physical effects can be unique, as everyone is. Death is one of the main causes of grief and grieving among youth today, but it is all-encompassing. In my case, grief was experienced by my father being absent for the most part, and my mother dating a man who abused me and my sister. This, coupled with the growing divide in my family stemming from jealousy and mistrust, caused angst and displacency among my family, and especially in me. This is grief. Others have taken all their pain and meaning of their loss and gradually developed into something amazing that recognizes the suffering in life. This is not closure. This isn't coping, and this isn't grieving. This is called growth, and growth is something that we would like to impress upon you here at GTU. You all have a responsibility to work through your grief. You can carry out responsive tasks that will engage your life in dealing with loss that you have experienced. These tasks have been taken from the William Worden Grief Counseling and Grief Therapy. These tasks are as follows. Task number 1 is accepting that the loss is real. This means that moving from shock and denial to mentally acknowledging that the death is real, or the loss is real in some cases. We must acknowledge that the burden is now on us. Task number 2 is working through the pain of grief. Pain, hurt, anger, depression, loneliness, they're all some of the side effects of grief, and some or all of these appear constantly or intermittently as the previous task takes effect. You have to give yourself permission to feel and work through your pain of grief. Trying to hold on to it and suppress it like I did will not help you, will not help others. Everyone is unique. Task number 3 is adjusting to a world without what has been lost. And this one has a few different tentacles to it. First is external adjustments. What is an external adjustment? Learning to come home to an empty house can be an external adjustment. Coping with not being able to call your friend or a relative when the urge arises is an external adjustment. For me, it was learning not to rely on my father or a male role model and figuring out who or how to be a man through other avenues. An internal adjustment is next. An internal adjustment usually involves your parent or best friend as primary emotional support. If you lose this person because of death or some other difficult circumstance, you're mentally at a crossroads at who you can rely on next. Spiritual adjustments aren't for everybody, but that would be the next thing that comes. A spiritual adjustment will often take place somewhere in the grief process, and it's your grief awakening a renewed longing to have God in your life. Now, in my case, that wasn't for me, but for many it is. Task number 4, emotionally place the person or relationships in a new place and move on with your life. No matter what your grief is caused by, getting through it and accepting it is the ultimate goal. If your mother dies, knowing that she is still with you is important. For me, it was finding a way to grow without a prominent father figure in my life, and I think I was able to do such that. Secondary losses are ones that you don't see coming. For example, when all of the turmoil was going on in my life, I lashed out on my close friends and lost some of them in the process. I held on to anger as a crutch for my grief. Those friends that I lost are secondary losses. The primary loss is often the sucker punch. It comes out of nowhere. It feels like the knockout blow. The secondary losses have the pummeling effect on the person's life. Primary losses send us to the mat for the mandatory count, but will we get up again? If we do, are we ready for that fight to resume? Well, let me be the first to tell you, you will get up again. You will continue this fight and you will conquer, like Rocky did in the second movie. Spoiler alert. Now let's talk a little bit about grieving teens and how to find or join these support groups. First, what is a grief support group? A group consists of about 3 to 12 students that meet to listen and discuss each individual's journey in loss and grief. The groups meet from 30 minutes to an hour, about once a week, and they share their emotions, their experiences, and their circumstances having to do with both primary and secondary losses and how they're moving through their lives. These groups are open at all times and gain new members through referrals from friends, teachers, counselors, and in my case, coaches. New people change groups for the better in most cases, and because they tend to revitalize and refocus everyone back to their own original grief. It is necessary to have a culture of respect. The leader sets the attitude by his or her respect expressed to every attending student. The example set by the grief coach determines the accepted type of interaction during each session. The purpose of these grief support groups is to deal with the emotional, social, physical, and spiritual aspects of grief. The main prompters of discussion are commitment to trust and promise of respect that each member makes before we begin. In each group, there are also ground rules. The first one being, members of the group are expected to always be on time. It's also a good life lesson. 2, it's kind of like Vegas in there. What's said in the group stays in the group. There's no exceptions. This is a safe space. 3, everyone gets equal time to talk. There's not one person monopolizing everything. The 4th one is people are free to share what they want and when they are ready to share. No one's forced to say anything. And the last one is the role of a group member is not to give advice. It's just to listen. The leadership in these groups is real, but
but it's passive enough to allow students to feel comfortable, and it really is more of a facilitation or coaching than leadership in the directive sense. The group dynamics are actually pretty cool as well. Students usually want to feel inclusion, to feel like they're a part of the group and that they want to fit in, that they fit into this group dynamic. Morris has learned that they need to feel like they are an important member of the group. They need to feel cared for by the group, and this occurs when they start to share and they feel supported and they feel respected or even cared for by some of the peers and some of the students that they're with. In the group, a young person is confronted with reality concerning the way that they are dealing with their emotions, their social issues, physical effects, and spiritual ramifications. In the last several years, Morris has seen that young people all have different needs and need to be in these groups for different lengths of time. He's seen some attend for a couple weeks and then be okay. But for the vast majority, they will need to attend for several months, and some attend for several years. For more information on grief groups and grieving teens, please visit the website or contact Dr. Morris directly.